The smell reaches you before the bodies do. It is not the smell of death exactly. You know that smell, every physician does. This is something older, something that does not belong to any disease you were taught to name. You are standing in the Borgo Ognissanti, a clothworkers' district in Florence, and it is March of 1348. The man at your feet died this morning. Under his arm, a swelling the size of a hen's egg, black at the edges, still warm. You have seen 3 like it this week. Yesterday there were none. You close your medical bag, a leather satchel, heavy with dried herbs and urine flasks you will not use, and you look down the street. There are more doors closed than open. The city already knows something you are only beginning to understand. Florence in the first weeks of 1348 is, by any measure, one of the most alive places on earth. 200,000 people, give or take. Contemporary chroniclers put the figure somewhere between 90,000 and 100,000 within the walls, the surrounding contado swelling it further. Wool merchants, dyers, notaries, priests. The Arno runs gray-green under the Ponte Vecchio, and the butcher's stalls on that bridge drip into it all day long. You live near the Duomo, whose dome is not yet built. That won't happen for another 60 years. What stands there now is a wide, unfinished cavity of brick and scaffold, and the sparrows nest in it by the thousands. You trained in medicine at Bologna, the most prestigious faculty in Italy. You know Galen. You know Avicenna. You believe disease arises from corrupted air, miasma, and from imbalances in the 4 humors of the body. This is not ignorance. This is the most sophisticated medical theory in the Western world in 1348, and you hold it with confidence. Your instruments, a cauterizing iron you have used perhaps twice, lancets for bloodletting, dried theriac, a compound antidote made from dozens of ingredients including viper flesh, which your supplier charges a small fortune for. You have a mortar and pestle, oil of roses, and enough Armenian bole, a reddish clay, to treat perhaps 20 patients. In January, there are rumors from Genoa. Ships arrived from the Black Sea in October of last year carrying something. The Genoese drove the ships back out of harbor with burning torches, contemporary accounts say, but not before sailors had come ashore. By December, Genoa is dying. By January, Pisa and Pistoia. Florence begins to close its gates to travelers from those cities. It will not be enough. March arrives cold and wet, which the physicians of Florence take as a hopeful sign. Cold air is less corrupt than summer heat, the theory goes. You are wrong about this, but you cannot know it yet. The first cases you see personally are in the wool district. The cloth workers live packed together, families of 8 in 2 rooms, sleeping on shared straw. The symptoms are fast and unmistakable once you have seen them once. Fever severe. A swelling in the groin or armpit or neck. The swellings will later be called buboes from the Greek word for groin. The skin around them darkens. The lymph node itself can reach the size of an apple. Patients vomit. They experience a thirst nothing relieves. Many of them develop dark blotches across the skin, subcutaneous bleeding, which gives the disease one of its later names, the Black Death. Giovanni Boccaccio, who is 25 years old and living in Florence at this exact moment, will later write about this in the introduction to the Decameron. He describes the buboes. He describes neighbors refusing to help neighbors. He is not exaggerating for literary effect. His account matches the city's own surviving communal records almost exactly. You lance the buboes on some patients, following standard surgical practice. Releasing corrupt matter is the theory. It does not help. You prescribe theriac, posies of strong-smelling herbs to purify the air around the sickbed, dietary restrictions. None of it helps. The patients who survive seem to do so entirely on their own. The ones who die do so within 2 to 7 days of the first swelling. Some die faster. There are accounts, Boccaccio includes them, of people going to bed well and being dead by morning, though this more likely describes the septicemic or pneumonic forms of the disease, which move faster than the bubonic. Florence's city government, the commune, is not passive. This is an important thing to understand. Medieval cities had bureaucracies, and Florence had one of the best in Europe. In the spring of 1348, the Commune passes emergency ordinances. They are documented in surviving records. They attempt to prohibit the sale of second-hand goods, which were correctly, if for entirely wrong theoretical reasons, suspected of spreading disease. They order the removal of corpses quickly, before sundown. They restrict public gatherings. They try to force physicians and surgeons to remain in the city and treat the sick. This last measure is necessary because many physicians are leaving. This is the thing that histories sometimes soften. Roughly half the physicians in Florence will leave or are already gone by April. The wealthy have mostly fled to their country estates. Boccaccio's Decameron is literally structured around a group of wealthy Florentines who flee to a villa outside the city to wait it out. This is not cowardice by the standards of 1348. The standard medical advice for plague, going back to the Arabic physicians, was 3 words: flee early, go far, return late. Cedo, lunge, tard. The physicians who taught you would tell you the same thing. You have not left. The sources do not tell us why individual doctors stayed. There are no surviving personal diaries from Florentine physicians of this exact period, but the communal records show that some did stay and practice. We know this because the commune paid them. Surviving payment records from Florentine and other Italian communes of the same period show that city physicians received emergency wages to remain at their posts. It is not impossible that money is part of why you are still here, or obligation, or the particular stubbornness of someone who needs to understand what they are looking at. By May, the work has changed in character. It is no longer medicine in any recognizable sense. It is triage. It is presence. You move through the city with a cloth soaked in vinegar held against your nose. Vinegar is thought to repel corrupt air. The famous beaked mask associated with plague doctors is a later invention. It belongs to the 17th century, not the 14th. In 1348, you wear what you have: a long robe, gloves when you can find them, that vinegar cloth. The smell you are trying to block is real and specific. The sweet, penetrating odor of infected tissue and decomposition that hangs over entire streets now. Some houses have been sealed, families locked inside with their sick and their dead both, a practice that communal records confirm was attempted, however inconsistently. You knock on a door. Sometimes no one answers. Sometimes someone calls from an upper window, in here, hurry. The staircase is dark. The room is darker. You assess, you lance if asked. You leave herbs you do not believe in anymore. You have stopped believing in them sometime in the last 4 weeks, though you cannot say the day. What you do now is bear witness. You confirm death. You record names at the request of the commune so that estates can be settled and property inherited. This administrative function of physicians during plague is documented in Italian communal archives. You make sure the dead are not left unrecorded. The gravediggers are working without pause. The churches cannot keep up with the masses. The commune has opened new burial pits outside the city walls. Boccaccio describes bodies stacked in layers, covered with earth, then more bodies on top like lasagna. He says, in a phrase that is historically documented and genuinely, devastatingly strange to read. The one question that consumes the educated men of Florence in the summer of 1348 is not how to stop the plague. By now most of them understand it cannot be stopped. The question is, what is the cause? In October of 1348, the medical faculty at the University of Paris issues a formal report commissioned by the King of France. Florence's physicians are debating the same framework. The Paris report, which survives and can be read today, concludes that the plague was caused by a conjunction of 3 planets, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, in the sign of Aquarius in March of 1345, which corrupted the air at altitude, the corruption then falling to Earth and entering the body through the pores and breath. This is not fringe opinion. This is the scientific consensus of the most credentialed medical institution in Europe. You believe a version of this, probably. Astral causation and miasma theory are not competing explanations in 1348, they are complements. The stars corrupt the air. The corrupted air corrupts the body. The logic is internally consistent. It simply has nothing to do with Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that is actually killing your patients, transmitted by flea bites from infected rats, concepts you do not have and cannot reach from inside the framework you inhabit. There are other explanations circulating, ones you hear in the street rather than in the hospital. That Jews have poisoned the wells, a rumor that is leading to violent pogroms across German cities right now. In 1348, even as Florence is spared the worst of this particular horror, partly because Jewish communities in Florence are smaller and partly because the commune takes steps documented in its records to prohibit violence, that the plague is divine punishment, that it is the end of the world itself. You hear all of these. You don't know what you believe anymore. You keep working. By the autumn of 1348, somewhere between a third and 60% of Florence's population is dead. The range in that estimate reflects genuine uncertainty in the historical sources. Parish death records are incomplete because the parishes themselves were overwhelmed. Modern historians working from surviving Florentine records generally accept that the city lost somewhere around half its population in this single outbreak, with the process continuing in waves through 1349. You may be among them. The historical record does not preserve the names of most individual physicians who worked in Florence that year. What survives are the commune's payment records, the survivors' accounts, the parish registers, the literary evidence of Boccaccio, who wrote the Decameron in the immediate aftermath and dedicated it in part to bearing witness to what he saw. The communal records show the city slowly, haltingly, trying to function. New officials appointed to replace the dead. Property disputes flooding the courts because whole family lines have been extinguished, and inheritance has become a legal chaos. If you survived, your world is unrecognizable. The labor shortage caused by mass death will, over the following decades, shift economic power toward the surviving workers, wages rise. Serfs across Europe begin to renegotiate their conditions. This is not something you would have predicted or celebrated in 1348. You are just trying to account for the people you knew last winter. What you carry, if you are alive, is not triumph. It is a specific kind of knowledge, that you stood inside a catastrophe with the wrong tools and the wrong theory, and you stayed anyway. That the work of medicine in 1348 was largely the work of witnessing, of making sure the dying were not alone and the dead were not unnamed. The smell of vinegar will stay with you. You will never be able to use it in a salad dressing again without your hands going still for a moment. Here is what the historical record gives us cleanly. Florence in 1348 lost somewhere between a third and a half of its people. The commune tried to manage the crisis through administrative means, and some of those measures, the rapid removal of the dead, the attempts at quarantine, were more effective than the medicine. The medicine was almost entirely useless against the disease itself, not from incompetence, but because the germ theory of disease would not exist for another 500 years. The physicians who stayed did so for wages, for duty, for reasons we don't have documents for. They could not cure anyone. They could document. They could lance. They could hold a wrist. Boccaccio, who also stayed, said later that the plague taught him that the only honest response to a world that can collapse without warning is to tell true stories clearly, without flinching. He meant that as a writer's manifesto. It was also a physician's. The beaked mask you picture when you think plague doctor is not from 1348. It is from 3 centuries later. What you actually wore was simpler, more human, and far less protected. You went in anyway. When the medicine is useless and the theory is wrong and people are dying faster than the records can keep up, what actually justifies staying? Is it the witnessing itself, the presence, the insistence that a dying person should not be alone even when there is nothing to offer? I'll leave that one with you.